It looks very cozy,
mossy,
very inviting, and warm.
It kind of looks like what you would see at a grand
there's a
library,
working fireplace,
like stone benches and big trees,
and we're sitting
and there are other
right
people
in front of it, and
having their medicine
it's
with
giving
books
off
and
a really
bottles near them.
Yeah, just welcoming light.
And
and all
I'm seeing
around
the
us
back
there
of
are floor
the
to
pharmacy, and
ceiling
because it's glass, I can
bookshelves,
still see
very nice bookshelves,
like people
possibly
coming in from
IKEA
the front.
bookshelves.
I could see
They are indeed.
thousands and thousands of
Yes,
rows of glass
functional
bottles
but
that
also
have
beautiful.
poet's consciousness in
and
them.
yeah, just pretty
in
much
my vision,
every
there's the
poetry
same
book
kind
that
of,
you can think of that you would want,
reverence
and you can
as,
just
like,
grab
being
it
in a
off the
library.
shelves.
Like nobody's
That's right. That's part of our
talking in
USP
their
here at the Poetry Pharmacy.
normal voice. They have, like,
Every poetry book, every
insight
poem you ever
voices.
wanted, right here, right now for you, catalogued and
Hello.
carefully stored in a
Steve
cool,
here,
dry place.
and welcome to
But not too
another
dry, not too cool.
episode of
Poems need to
Poetry
breathe,
Pharmacy,
need to talk to other
where
poems.
I invite someone I like
a bit of
in
warmth
mind to
and
bring
moisture
in a
is also
poem
good,
they think we should have
which is
here
where
in
the fireplace comes
pharmacy
into
on our
it.
shelves.
And vegan
A poem we
marshmallows.
might want to
That
prescribe
would
to
be
others,
Dandy's
also
vegan
for
marshmallows, for
ourselves.
those in the know.
Maybe a poem we
The amount of
carry
marshmallows we
around
get through in the
our
pharmacy.
existential first
I
aid
wonder if
kit.
Dandy's sponsor
We
podcasts.
read the
Dandy's,
poem,
if you're
we chat
listening,
about it,
can we talk
and
marshmallows
then
and
I present
poetry at
another
some
poem from
point?
the pharmacy that I think
The voice you
might
just
work
heard was that of the
well.
poet Chen Chen, describing our little pharmacy with a big mission, that of getting the poems you need most into your eyes, ears,
If the visitor to
heart,
the
soul,
pharmacy is a
lungs,
writer,
between your toes.
we conclude
Chen
then
is the
reading
author of a
his
recent
own
collection
work.
from Boa, the fabulous
speaking of
title When I Grow
pharmacy,
Up I Want to Be a
I
List of
was
Further
delighted to
Possibilities.
have not
If you haven't
just
already
one but two
bought that,
really
what are
great
you waiting for?
conversations with the
If
poet
the apocalypse is
Finn
nigh, you might as well
Menzies,
stock up
who has
on as
just
much
brought out
poetry
his
as you possibly
incredible
can.
debut collection with Fog
So we're going to kick
called
things off today
Beautiful
in the
Odyssey
pharmacy
Don't
with
Yearn.
Chen reading a
Hot
poem by
press,
Keegan
check it
Lester,
out. I'll
which
put
we'll
some
then
links
talk
in the
about
episode notes.
before I prescribe a poem
First
to
time
him
Finn
from
came
J.
into the
Dodd,
pharmacy, we
and
chatted
finally
about
some
Lord,
Chen Chen wizardry
Francis
to
J.
round
Harris.
things off.
It was
Hope
such a
you
lovely
enjoy.
conversation, but I screwed up a
So
little
this
bit with the mics, and
comes
so
at the end
Finn
of the
very
the
kindly
main
agreed
section
to come back, and
from
this
his
time
book.
we talked.
This shouldn't be beautiful,
we
but
talked
it
about
was,
Brilliant
and it was all I
Max
had,
Ritvo,
so I drew it.
whose untimely death a year
To the
ago
tin
now.
band that read Keegan
still
Matthew
mourning.
Lester,
And
21841
I wanted to also read Finn a poet I'm
Seacrest
excited
Lane,
about at the moment called Jim
Huntington
Ferris.
Beach, California,
We start with Max
Eder
and his
Elementary,
poem,
the one
Afternoon.
with a brontosaurus imprint on the top. To the man who told me
Afternoon.
to believe in what we could not see and called
when
it
I was
science
about to die,
before telling
my
us
body
they were
lit up.
mistaken.
like when
To
I
the
leave
letter
my
I
house
received
without
from
my
Science
wallet.
a few years back.
What am I missing?
We here at Science
I
want
asked,
to apologize.
patting
We
my
had
chest
our own misgivings,
pocket.
but wanted to see how it would play out.
And I am missing
We are
everything
sorry
living
about your brontosaurus.
that won't come with me
There are cartoons
into the
and
sunny
movies
afternoon.
and books. We were too late to call it off.
My
Museums
body
are
lights
doing
up
well.
for life,
People could look
like
at the
all the
scale of
wishes
our
being
hyperbole
granted
for
in
the
a
first
fountain
time and
at the same
understand the way we
instant.
love.
all the
We
coins
literally
burning
made a
the
skeleton
fountain
of
dry.
hyperbole to teach you to dream
And I give
again.
my breath
Museums
small,
kept their lights on
bird-shaped
due to
pipe.
things we made up. We got
the
adults
distance,
to make up stories for
behind
children to
several
explain
voices
the
haggling,
feasibility of something
I hear a
so
sound
large
like
and
heads
terrifying
clicking
and
together,
confusing that only
like a
ate
game of
plants,
pool,
that only a
played
comet could have
with
killed.
people by machines.
Vegetarians loved us in the 90s. Now we sell drugs and will be in business for a long time. Would you like some drugs?
in your voice.
Also, Pluto, not a planet. Sorry about that too. We grew
So,
tired of
this
discovering.
poem,
We wanted to create things, just this one time.
it's very.
We wanted
I
to
mean,
know
it's-
what it would feel like to
we'll
paint
give a link
rooms
to
for
it,
an afternoon.
on the episode.
Sorry.
But it's worth
Sincerely,
being able
Science.
to see the poem because the poem
To the
is
prayer
it's a
Science
sort of
and I wrote
quite
together.
a narrow poem.
God,
it's almost like a
rid
tree.
me of God.
You've got a bird in the poem. And,
God,
and
help me give up
the poem, the
credibility
shape of the poem
today
is
so that I might be
it
able
could almost be
to
like a
make
tree.
something
Mm-hmm.
for someone else.
And with that in mind, I'm wondering what lines.
So when I read this poem, I
particular
thought,
might
this is
call out
this
to
is
you
such a good
in this
poem to
poem.
have in the pharmacy. I mean, there's certain poems
like
that when you read
like
them,
a bird in a tree.
they
Are there particular lines that really?
they just have
Calling for your
an
attention.
immediate effect on your kind of
Yeah,
neurophysiology, and
the
I suppose
first stanza
like powerful
and
drugs.
the fourth stanza.
You recognize that there's some
It's also kind of funny
there's some
because one of
powerful
the
active
things that my
ingredients in
intimate
this
circle
poem
knows about
that's
me is that
having
I
this
always
effect
forget
on
my
you.
wallet.
Yeah, this poem makes me
So-
feel really
and so that
good.
feeling of like your body lighting up with muscle
And-
memory,
I think a lot of
especially
it
about
has
wallets,
to
is
do
very,
with
like, for
its
me,
humor.
Very visceral.
Right.
The Brontosaurus.
So there's already that kind of
and
personal
how that comes
association
in.
there.
But it starts off in this really
the thing that interests me about that first
place
stanza
where
is
we
those
get,
words, my body
the
lit
poet's
up,
full name
right,
and
to
where
explain
they were
that,
born and this
or to
specific
give words
place.
to that sensation. Because
and then it just latches
I know
on
what that
to
sensation's like
this
as well, because I'm
detail
also
in a
incredibly
surprising way. The
absent-minded,
Brontosaurus
and
imprint.
I'm always, you know.
And that just
Could
becomes.
I ask you?
yeah.
Could I ask you what
something or
what
other?
what is this
and-
tin band? I mean, I'm not even. I mean, it's
I'm not
obviously
sure
it's a childhood object.
If I was right to this
but
part, I'm not sure if I would have ever
what-
used the word
what
my
is it?
body.
Is it
if I ever used the word
do you
lit
have an
up,
image
I
of
wonder
it in
why
your
he
mind?
uses
Is it
lit up. I wonder what that
something?
does.
I'm just wondering if it's a kind of like an American thing
for the poem,
that
or
that
for
kind
the,
of American
for us
kids would
as
have
we
in
move
nursery
into the
school.
poem.
It's
What is-
what is it
why
exactly?
do you think
what do
lit
you
up?
imagine it as?
Is that your experience as well?
Honestly, I don't really know either.
Because for me, it's almost the opposite.
It
It's
just
almost
seems
like an
to be
emptiness. It's
this
almost a loss. It's a sort of
personal
a sense
item.
like
I imagine it because it's saying
like an
like the
amputated
name
limb,
of the elementary
kind of that
school
sort
is
of
on it. So I'm
feeling like it
imagining
should
that
be
it's
there, but
something
it's not in a
school
way.
related that you would bring with
I
you,
know.
like a
What are your thoughts on those,
lunchbox
just on that
or
phrase, on the lit up?
a backpack,
I like
a keychain,
what you said.
some
I feel
kind
like
of personal item that you would take with you
You
to
are
school.
explaining to me what it's
I
like
just love that
for the body
it has
to-
like this
to light
information
up.
on it, sort
like
of
if
like
you're experiencing
one of those labels
an
that you
arm
would
that's
get
not there,
in case
that phantom arm,
something gets lost.
I almost
how to
see, like,
return to the owner. So that's how I'm
the
picturing
outline
it.
of it lit
Yeah.
up.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And then he goes
I like
from
it
there
because I feel
into
like
this incredible
we are so conditioned
riff.
to
Yeah.
listen
On
to our
science.
minds that
Yeah,
has language,
this
but our
this
body
letter
also speaks to
from
us.
science, and I love that it's
And so
science and not
Light
scientists.
is a way to say I'm
Yeah.
speaking
It's
to
not
you, but it doesn't
a person.
have
It's
a
this force. It's this
So the body is
collective
speaking
force
to
of science as a
person,
whole,
but it's not
writing
telling it
this
something in its ear.
letter
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
speaker and to the reader, really.
Almost like Morse code.
And I just love
Yes. Yes.
that associative
Yeah.
And
leap,
interestingly, that
that
sort
it
of
takes
ties in with
into
poetry in some
this
level, even though
world
poetry
in
is
which
voicing things
a
and it's using
dinosaur
language.
has been made
There
up in
is-
science as sort of
there is a
confessing
Morse-
its
there is
sin
Morse code
of
in
having
poems.
done
There
this,
is the
and
there
it's
is
very
the rhythm,
apologetic,
and there's a kind of a Morse
but
code
also
rhythm
defensive.
in
Talking about the
in a
museums
poem, right?
being kept
Yes.
open
The rhythm of
because
the body,
this
the body of the
invention,
poem
and
has the rhythm
the
to it.
stories that children get
Totally.
to hear
I think
from adults.
that's
so,
one thing. Yeah,
it's,
see,
the
I think
poem
that's one thing
starts
that
to really
poetry
explore
can give is,
the
like,
pleasure
it
in
speaks to
invention,
your
in
topical
creating
intellectual
something,
self,
making
but it
something
also
up.
speaks to the subtler self too.
And even while apologizing
So both
for
of those
it, and then the
mechanisms
poem
of
ends up
communication
in
are
this
happening in
really
poetry, which
wonderful
I like because
space of celebrating
I want to feel more
creation.
connected to
So
that body
in a way, the poem ends up
myself.
being about poetry.
And
Without,
what happens to
really sort of
what happens
naming
to your
that
body?
subject.
Maybe I'm going to ask you to read it again.
It sort of goes
that
in this
my body lights up for life.
back way,
and just notice what
into,
I'd be interested what
talking
happens
about,
to your body when you
creating in
read
general,
it.
and what does that mean?
Because it's such a. I think you're right. It's
fell
such
in
a
love
powerful,
with those last lines.
vital part.
God
of the
help
poem.
me give
do you
up
wanna,
credibility
do you want to just read that
today
part again?
so that I might be able
Yes.
to make something for someone else.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you about those
My
last
body
lines,
lights up for life.
because
Like all
I
the
kept
wishes
on
being
reading them and
granted in a
rereading them
fountain.
the first time and
at the
second
same
and the third and
instant,
the fourth time, and they
all the
they
coins
have,
burning the
there's
fountain
something
dry.
circular about them, right? That they have a kind of like a kind of almost mind jamming Koan like circularity to them,
Yeah,
and
it's quite emotional for me.
I just wonder what you. Yeah, what do you take from them? Because
I get the
whenever I read
sense
them, I
of-
feel like I can kind of grasp what they're saying, and then suddenly
When you
it
walk out
eludes
of a
me
movie
again.
and then your eyes are blinded.
Yeah, there's something
'cause of the
really
daylight.
mysterious,
Like, that's what I feel.
magical
It's so
about that
luminous
ending.
that like it
And
would like burn.
yeah, I feel like every time
and
I read it in a somewhat different
imagine
way.
somebody,
But I guess the main
like on the
way
precipice of their
that
life
I
ending,
interpret
having that much
that
hope
ending
that their eyes would
be
burn out. It's
this
just,
idea of
it's very inspirational for me.
giving up or rejecting authority.
Like there's a lot of
because
vital force
of this letter
in it.
from science.
Yeah.
rejecting authority in order to
But I also
make something.
wonder,
And that creativity
the vitality of that,
is rooted in
that
this
flash, that moment, right, where
to
all the coins burn the fountain
new
dry. It's
ways
almost like
of looking at the
explosion
world,
to a certain
and
extent.
unusual ways
That,
of looking at the world.
Again, and I think
so that,
the poem
you
does
might
this in
make
some way.
something
It
up
treads
like
a line
a
between
brontosaurus,
this
this fantastical
sort of
creature. Even though dinosaurs are real, this particular one happens not to be. But that there's a sort of delight in that. And I think part of being a poet is staying open to that.
Annihilating vitality of death.
The possibility.
Yeah.
I think that's also what makes it so moving.
There is something of that kind of Keatsian negative capability as well, right?
In the sense image of all the coins
giving up
burning,
authority,
the fountain dry.
We're also
there's something quite scary there as well.
In order to do that, we're also having to.
Even though all the wishes are being granted, that's lovely. But then
to some
all the
extent,
coins burning, they're burning.
That's
That's
like the limits of a page,
that's
like the limits of a line, which is so perfectly captured in this very paradoxical.
I think what's
God
inspiring
rid
to
me of God.
Yeah.
How is that possible for God to rid you of God? God, help me to give up credibility. Help me to give up credibility of you.
Right.
To give up credibility of you, I need to believe in you.
Right.
To a certain extent.
Sort of ultimate authority. It's this relationship, it's this dialogue.
You're right, there is sort of like
pretty contradictory at its heart. But that's sort of this relating to the world, having to observe and take in what's around. I mean, I think about the relationship to language too.
Allowing
that there is already a knowledge and an authority in language, and in how we learn it, and there are these rules and structures.
The poem could end there, and I think
so
if it ended there, it would be like a kind of a feel-good poem. It'd be like,
obeying those rules or listening to those rules,
brave
but
Max
also bending
Ritvo,
them.
Cancer sufferer since
there
the
is
age
this
of
real
16,
sort of back and forth. So
what a brave guy! But I think what makes it not just a poem of beauty and of bravery, but also of just brilliance and humanity, is that he then goes further than that, right? It's not just this sort of explosive supernova, and then it's all over. He goes then actually to quite a dark place.
A lovely thing there is that
with
sometimes this distinction we sometimes make between
every
the
time
arts
I
and the
hear or even
sciences,
kind of
right? In a
think
way,
about those
between
heads
authority and
together,
creativity, you could
there's
also put it in that way.
Right.
It's perhaps a false
horrible about that,
distinction,
right?
because
and the voices
here,
haggling. I mean, what are they haggling about? It's like who's going to have it?
Kept open for this.
What is the haggling for you? In the
I love hyperbole, and I think that often poems grow out of
Okay, first of all, I think that you make a really good point. That
exaggeration,
it's not
or this desire to
like this
kind of
blazing spiritual plane, but he brings it back to earth.
Reality.
That it's like a real ordinary life.
And I think of Emily Dickinson's
that is what makes
"Tell all the truth,
so
but tell it
brilliant.
slant." So something sort of
I think that's what it sounds like.
Exaggerated. I also think
earthly
of
egos when you're
the
in
contemporary
between
poet
worlds.
Mary Ruffalo,
Like just the
who
regular chatter of
Keegan
humans
Lester's
and like
first
what they
book,
care about
for this book prize
when they're self-centered and have all their beliefs in front of them.
Actually, and she
sounds
says
like haggling.
something really great.
So like I am
funny about
at the fountain,
how poems
and then
basically
at the last
begin
stanza, I'm
as
actually
mistakes.
in the hospital bed.
But
like,
unlike other people,
in the consciousness,
poets aren't trying to sort of correct their mistake. They just keep going
from, like,
in the direction of that mistake. And so to me, that's also related to this line about hyperbole. We made a whole skeleton out of hyperbole. We just kept going.
And to quote you back to yourself, or rather to quote you via
and then of course the
Tolstoy,
poem goes
I think
into
you did an erasure recently of
Tolstoy
on that theme, where
which
your erasure reads,
to the next poem, I think perhaps we could
art
leave that
is the
for
life of a mistake. It
for further discussion at another time.
From the artist, but
that
which again, I think
is
is very
that
much
next layer,
in
right?
line with that. That Ruffalo.
There's some kind of
and I did that
whole
erasure actually because
and divinity and.
I was kind of annoyed
the
with
place
Tolstoy.
of suffering.
Like I was reading that passage, and he was being very authoritative about art
in those last
and what artists do.
I know, and I love that
people
it
who
has
doesn't consider
words
artists,
like playing
the
pool
mistakes that they make
and machines. I was like, I would never have that.
And I was like, but what if there's something beautiful
or heaven?
in
like I would never have those associations.
Those mistakes and those people who are making those mistakes who might not consider themselves artists necessarily, but
because it makes it human, doesn't it?
So you literally undercut him, as it were. You literally erased the authority and allowed some contradictory but also truth to emerge.
Thank you for bringing that in.
But it was still kind of conversation at the same time, as I was saying earlier, because I'm still using his words. So it was very much a God rid me of God.
Let's move on to the poem that I'd like to read to you.
So to stay with hyperbole, that seems like a good word to kind of jump into the next poem, which is the poem I chose.
I thought before I read it, I thought I might also read just a stanza, not a stanza, a paragraph from an essay that Jim Ferris wrote for the Georgia Review, which I'll send it to you. I'll also put a link into this.
Poetic. Every poem is a death, and each stanza an economy built on an ocean floor covered in bones.
His body, but as a body unto
like
itself.
My mouth.
Poems are bodies, Vernon asserts. Quote, they are drops that break off from the mass of a poet's body, congeal, take shape, and become bodies themselves.
Cargo passage.
When a poem speaks, it speaks with its entire body, not only with its voice, but with its rhythm, pace, shape, and tone, as well as its denotative content.
Requires a body to expose itself, a grammar called recompense. Every poem.
So let me read Jim Ferris's Facts of Life.
Of how many questions
with that in mind
fit in your mouth, or if
Facts
the jaw
of Life
learns to unhinge, how will it hang?
Where's the glory in it?
And full, be ripe.
I am not a survivor. Whatever the state of my legs, whatever happened there,
the seed,
know this.
The fresh and the
I walk down the street whole,
the harvest,
whether I limp
the drought,
or stumble,
or
cane or crutches,
every poem
roll
is
in a
masturbation.
chair. This is my body.
In so many words.
Look, if you like.
Metered stroke,
this is my meat.
Lyric and verse,
substance,
still,
but not essence.
Even
essence,
in its most spectacular
but not
excitement,
fate.
Must
some of all its particles back to the big one, but particular to no single interpretation in a cosmos of possible ontologies.
Powerful stuff.
That we all try to limit with all our soft
with this
might,
very strong statement, which
only the most
a lot of
temporary instructions.
Statements expressed very declaratively.
So,
every poem is a death.
Explain that,
it almost feels like an unquestionable truth.
Right.
But I was wondering, when
you
then think about it, I was wondering, well, in what way is that true? Is that
facts?
In what way do you find truth in that statement?
Around them,
every poem is a death.
Like we live around rivers.
Well, on one level,
my cave, your walks, like we live among animals.
Kind of a basic literal
heart,
level.
My brace,
I think about how hard
like
poems are to write.
With,
and it can kind of feel like you're wringing yourself out, trying to put together
that was also a very beautiful reading.
Thank you.
House of language.
Like the Ritvo, this is a very
there is
moving
this
poem.
sort of
I found as I
the
was
energy
actually
exerted,
reading,
but I also think
particularly
of
the first part,
a kind of
where he
shedding
talks about, I walk down the street whole, whether I limp or stumble, cane or crutches,
like
roll
maybe,
in a chair, that lovely whole
so having
roll,
to,
right? Beautiful,
go through,
it brings such beauty and music to the roll of the chair, right?
Tremendous.
This is my body. Look if you like. This is my me. All of that. I felt myself kind of really welling up reading that
stanza.
It's incredibly
how it
moving.
follows up an economy built on an ocean floor covered in bones, like mouth. So this really bodily process as well. Yeah,
it's interesting you mentioned the word house because
similar.
When I read that first line, I thought, let me look up the word economy. It's a very particular word, and just remind myself what does that mean, economy, right? And of course, economy is a careful management of available resources, but it comes from these two Greek words. One is oikos, house, and the other one is manage. So it's essentially household management. So kind of how you could say maybe how we put our
the wholeness,
sort of existential
right? So
houses
even when he says, for example, this is my substance but not essence.
But the interesting thing is that if that's the case, this house, kind of qualifies, as you say,
this is my reading of it. He's almost saying, well, in a way it is though. It is your essence, right? It feels quite. Your meat is your essence. So he goes, okay, maybe it is essence.
Yeah, I think of the phrase "body of work" too.
And then so there's all of these sort of qualifications going on.
Collections of poems.
It's not just like a sort of some sort of
body of work.
Bumper sticker.
And a little later on in the poem,
like some sort of strapline, like I am whole.
Every poem costs some mass, some measure, requires a body to expose itself.
There's something more complex.
I mean, I find the poem just very candid about these costs and the vulnerability that it takes
like, we are not
to write something. This exposure.
And yet, of course,
I think about when I received the galleys for my chapbook. But
I think he's asking us to read in multiple dimensions.
I've been thinking about these poems and working on them for so long. But then it struck me, seeing them in physical form, that this was
would
real.
You say that also he recognizes
how personal the poems were and how vulnerable.
Because of the way our eyes
so I think this poem really gets at that
signs, shall we say,
phenomenon. Requires a body to expose itself, and
we cannot help but also sometimes
the erotic element.
So, for example,
in this poem, like it's interesting to me that it goes from death to
some of your fantastic
masturbation
videos.
In that last part,
and in some of your early videos,
spectacular excitement, and this pun at the end, at finish, can refer to the erotic act as well as death.
Yeah, I look totally different.
And in a way, I don't know if this was intentional. I'm
so
sure
much
it
so
was,
that
there is also a pun in the first line, right?
I can't
there is already the
it
masturbation
feels like
in the first line because
even though I
I think in French the little death is the orgasm.
But to me it feels like
every poem. You could also say every poem is an orgasm.
Person who I saw in the early videos, that's
and
kind
the
of like,
mouth.
If you were to tell me now, that's my sister.
The main body part that's sort of focused on.
I would be like, okay, that's how you
every poem is that same mouth.
You got your sister to do those videos, and now here's you.
The jaw learns to unhinge.
And
so there's this image
in a way,
of
that's me
how much can the body
reading
open,
the signs quite in a very simple binary fashion, in a very simple that was your sister,
world,
female. This is you, male.
There's this travel image.
I can't help
the
that.
ship and sea and sail.
I don't think anyone.
But it's
can help that
through the body.
I'm really appreciating the analogy here.
Now you mentioned a little bit earlier, Mary. I can't
there's something
Mary
essential.
Rueful,
no matter what happens.
Mary Rueful.
To the casing, but then also
an interview
just like
with her
how he's qualifying the essence. The essence
and
is
she was sort of saying something like
influenced by the casing. They are in relationship.
She wishes that someone had sat her down, although I think someone did, and she of course ignored them. Someone sat her down when she was in her 20s and basically said, "Don't go into the po-biz." Poetry at that time, it seems like the most important thing in the world, the center of the universe.
In that way, you're always whole.
It's I mean she put it in
that way
in very stark terms. She said no one's interested in poetry, nobody reads poetry, nobody gives a
even if
shit
it's
about poetry basically.
And
I wonder if in a way that this poem also kind of plays with
your
that
sense of yourself,
again, that sort of distinction, like the distinction in the previous poem between the arts and the science, that distinction between kind of poetry being
even though
the most important thing we have, the most significant thing we have,
the FIN Zine shifted,
and also poetry always being the most negligible thing we have, because of course with that final or, right? Or it might be all of these incredibly important, meaningful existential things, or it could just be
a little bit,
masturbation, which a moment of erotic excitement,
that
a moment
essence,
of self-soothing,
the inner
but nothing
sign,
more.
For me, reminds me of yoga, and like how no matter what position you're in, your breath will follow.
In terms of those
and sometimes your breath is shallow, and sometimes it's deep, but it's always your breath. And so my inner sign
everything
is
and the
it
nothing.
does shift,
the everything and
but
the
it's
nothingness
always
of poetry.
the thing. Does that make sense?
Well, I love
the importance and the
that takes us back to
negligibility,
Ritvo's
if that's a word of poetry.
Yeah.
Which he gives to the...
Well, I love how this poem gets
either willingly
me
or
to
unwillingly,
think about,
who knows, at our end,
indulgence.
whether we give up
and
our breath.
how writing can be an indulgence. But I also think of Audre Lorde's essay,
or wrested from us.
Poetry is not a luxury. And just
hard
how
to know, and
she
doesn't
argues
know either, of course, writing a poem.
That poetry is this necessity, in part because
coming back to Ritvo
actually
for a
this
moment,
kind of pleasure is a necessity,
stanza.
and that often
this is a poem
we
I've learned
create
by
this
heart.
sort of false dichotomy between
what I noticed learning the
this
poem
thing is
that
pleasurable
in that
and this
stanza,
thing is serious
my
because
body
it
lights
isn't
up to
pleasurable.
life like all the wishes being granted in a fountain,
it's laborious,
all the
or
coins,
we can tell
all the
that
wishes
serious
granted in the
because
fountain at the same instant.
I think like the stereotypical image of poetry as this puzzle or this riddle that you have to decode,
because it's a long line, because you almost have to say it all in like one winding
act of
snake-like
language
fashion.
that
when you get
gives
to the end of
pleasure,
the line,
that is something that you
the
feel
line
in the
has
body.
robbed you of breath.
And so I think this poem is
and
trying
so
to
you're
collapse
actually,
that
you actually
dichotomy
are
or that binary of pleasure versus something more
consciously
serious.
or unconsciously forcing you
and
to
it's sort of
embody
acknowledging that
moment
when
when
every
you
poem
would have to
is
give up your
masturbation,
breath.
or it could be, but that there's nothing wrong with that at the same time.
As living
there's
creatures, we can then
to
take the next
celebrate
breath and we
in
can have it
that,
back.
supposed
but
indulgence.
For
I love
and for all of us,
the
there's
play
going
on
to come
words
that moment, of
also
course,
with
when you don't get it
crafting metered stroke too.
Yes.
Which is scary.
So
I wonder if that was
the rhythm and the
like
sound, the pace
subconscious
of
or
poetry. Sort of.
There's definitely something to that, where like everything's burning at once,
act.
including your breath, and then the breath that you have left
I
for the
feel
small
like
bird
this
pipe
poem
is so frail.
Getting at
by the time you get there, unless you take a big
why do
one.
we make that distinction?
But when I read it, I felt a little bit
short
winded.
space, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It really kind of packs it all in.
It's interesting. It's sort
Let's
of it's a
move
poem
to
that
the pleasures of
enacts
your poetry, Chen.
A death state.
Yeah, I think so.
So, pleasure is
I think that's why I like
very
it so
much
much.
a word.
I chose it partly because we're all afraid of it.
Reading you.
And so I wanted to give
and yet, of course,
us
like
a little
all good
instruction
pleasures,
from someone who knows about it.
There is also,
and maybe for good reason, we're afraid because it's
not a fickle pleasure. It
doesn't feel good.
Pleasure. It's a wise pleasure. There's a lot of wisdom in this
find
poem,
oneself without any oxygen
them
and not
regularly
being able to take
to my patients. I actually do. I actually
the
prescribed
most extreme deprivation
at the end of a
we will
session
ever
on Friday.
face,
I said,
go
away and read this.
Oh wow.
I'm taking a breath.
I think your poems
take a breath
really
and
good
come back
medicine.
for a moment to
they have that spoonful of sugar.
This
more than a
ending.
spoonful. They have that.
Again,
they have that, which makes
the
medicine go down.
This,
in terms of people actually also then being open to the
very wholehearted and very
to the wisdom. I can't really think of another word.
Pragmatic understanding of what life is. Right?
The poem that I would
living
love
with
you
around
to read, please, is
warts. The phrase
the
warts
last
and all
poem
kind of comes to mind
in the
right?
collection.
Among
Could you give us a
despite
reading?
Sure.
There's that fall on the
Poplar
the stress
Street.
on despite, and then because.
Sorry. Hello. Are you on your way to work too?
Because.
I was just taken aback by how you also have a
Yeah.
briefcase, also small and
That's
brown.
what being
I was taken by
alive
how you
feels
seem
like.
secretly to love everything.
Well, wait. What's the despite
Are you my new
because
coworker?
for you?
Oh, I see.
For me,
Still, good to meet you.
Like, I was listening to Alice Notley in an interview, and she was saying
maybe beyond briefcases,
she's trying to write
we have some things in common.
out of limitations, and one of the biggest limitations is her human body.
I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid of farting.
You know, like you
even
can't
around people I love. Do you think your mother loves you when you fart?
Because you have to live within
Does your mother love you all the time?
Of your human body, and so
have
despite is like we get
I like
hurt.
that the street we're on
have nerves.
is named after a tree.
We have to take in oxygen. We have to
when
eat.
There are none.
But then also, that's how we.
I wonder if a tree has ever been named
and transcend
after
and
a
then
street,
have all these
whether that
other
worked
things
out.
because
if I
of
were
this
a street,
limitation.
I hope I get a good name.
Yeah.
Not Maine.
Yeah, it's
or
the
Pleasant.
limitations. Yeah.
One night I ran out of an apartment down North Pleasant Street,
which I think is a good way to sort of segue into
with
your
pines
poem,
and
because
oaks.
I think
it felt too hopeful.
I think
after what happened. After I told my mother I liked a boy, and she said,
if you're happy to,
you're sick.
To read.
Get out before you get your brother sick.
Okay.
Sometimes parents and children become the most common
Every
strangers.
night I get on
Eventually,
my knees
a street
and pray our
appears
human
where they can meet again,
bodies will become
or
words.
Not. Do I love
words
my
are
mother?
dependable old ships.
Do I have to forgive in order
hard
to
exteriors
love? Or
and
do
empty
I have
stomachs.
To love for forgiveness to
you can
even
stick
be
your
possible?
hand down a word's tidy
What
throat.
Do you think?
Pluck some of her
I'm
memory
out this thing
like wildflowers that grow on a highway. Our bodies are a bay, stirred up after rain.
I'm trying to say,
the waviness of them keeps us from giving shelter to another. We cannot be stuffed like taxidermy.
We've just been given our names.
If I could, I would open the flute of my body, clean up the slime. The body is such an unpleasant hotel.
Talking earlier about
and let you take or leave a gift.
Making a poem, and
wonderful.
I suppose I was wondering when I read this poem, and when I read any poem that I particularly
I
admire.
wondered if we might start
just a very
talking a little
question
bit about
how does a poem like this get made, just in terms
kind of the messiness of the body, because this is definitely a line that
poem like this. Could you share that a bit with us?
Spoke to me.
Yeah, so it really started. I can remember specifically. It was in 2014. I was at this week-long
if I could,
series
I would
of
open
writing
the
workshops.
Of my body, clean up
sort
the
of a
slime.
summer camp
the body
for
is
writers,
such an
I
unpleasant
guess.
Hotel, and let you take
It's kind of an odd feeling. You like all wake up together and go to breakfast and then go to workshop.
And I suppose in a way, there's part of me that's almost sort of
our workshop
almost
instructor
wanted you not to go there. It's kind of like let's just stay.
Yeah, for poetry, was telling us
oh, that's so lovely.
that we should try to be more specific.
And it's like, do we have to
go
to?
I guess he was noticing that not a lot of us were writing with specific places in poems,
I'm
or like
aware
place
of
names,
it being almost that sort
and he just encouraged us to
which
do
makes
that.
Me then think of how
and so as
how
sort of an exercise, I just decided to give this poem that title. So I had that title, Popular Street.
A few weeks ago, I had like a
I was in Amherst, Massachusetts, which is where I grew up. I went to elementary school, middle school there.
I will do anything not to do. It was
like literally a walk down memory lane. So I was thinking a lot about streets, street names, and things that have happened there. And I'd already written a couple poems that I knew would go into this collection that all had to do with this night. I was 13,
I feel I have the same sentiments about the stomach bug. I get it about every other year because
my parents,
I work with children
and had this really
and they're
difficult emotional confrontation
they're lovely,
with my mother.
They get me sick all the time.
And I sort of ran out.
I have the same feelings
thought about running away
where I'm like,
from home.
This is so
there are a couple poems in the book that return to that
I'm pissed off about my body too.
And this ended up being
slimy.
one of them, I think, because I was just in that very associative
That's my
place
despite
of thinking
and
about
because.
street names, and I was in the town where that night had occurred.
And is that where the fantasy almost becomes?
And so it was just another
prayer, and prayer is a kind of a fantasy
entryway into that memory, and
a
painful
every night
memory
I get on my
too.
knees and pray our
but I wanted to try to write about it from a sort of different angle, and that's where this you in the poem comes in. This sort of imagined
old ships,
addressee, I guess, that the speaker is engaging with on the street, as they're walking. And so I just imagined this conversation taking place.
I think I'm lamenting two things. Like, one is my limitation as a body.
What makes it so
because as a Buddhist,
is how you get to this kind of moment of trauma.
I gotta say, I'm not the best Buddhist because I am super lustful and thirsty for enlightenment, where I can get from my small self to my big self,
you start off with this
or the self. And so I'm lamenting the slime because I'm like, get me out of here sometimes. But I'm also lamenting how we're forever lonely.
We have things in common. I like jelly beans. I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid of farting.
Like, I really wish someone could get in here.
That's a moment of shared humanity. We all, essentially, most of us, like jelly beans, or afraid of death, or afraid of farting, or ambiguous around farting.
I have living cells that are
and then you move, there's a little
I wonder
sort of
also
indication, when you start talking about mother, and then you move into this rupture, this more ambivalent
this is where I think it also ties in, particularly if you read the essay by Ferris, where he talks about as a
unconditional love, which we
pretty much all through his childhood he had to have a number of
and always have from our parents, breaks down in some way
on his legs.
One thing that was really interesting when you were reading it, because
sculpt and
I didn't want to write on my copy,
mold them in ways so as to reduce his pain or give him greater mobility.
So I've got I basically found the poem online and printed up a copy for myself. And surgery. I noticed when you were reading, just because I got an earlier
carried
version
out on his body,
that in the lines where you talk
in
about
a sort of a transformational way, which is something you had to experience as well.
In the earlier version, you had.
I wonder what.
After she said she was afraid of me,
having
terrified. So
submit to
it seems like there is a real moment of kind of
the mind wants,
even though
as
you are
say,
being attacked, or this person
you
is
want
being
something,
attacked,
but then the body in a way has to go through the pain.
There is also it seems to me a moment of kind of empathy for the fact that maybe her judgment, her criticism is coming from fear. And then I noticed in the version that's in the book.
It's such a beautiful thing. I think there's like a taboo about asking a trans person about their body transformation,
that you had removed that. I'm just really interesting.
Something that
what was your thinking, say, in taking?
Okay, so the feeling that I get right now is like
focusing more
the band of brothers feeling, like
more on the attack. Really, I mean, you leave
in battle together.
What is really
forever,
those cruel and kind of
identities are intertwined, and going through surgery for me was letting my body know what my inner sign had been feeling for all these years.
Although I do remember,
and so like it's almost like they got to face each other.
Edits,
and now they are bonded together, and so I feel actually much more like a physical entity after surgery
than
I felt.
I guess
more abstract before that,
and.
So
I feel okay with both versions existing. The one that you're talking about, you can just find it online. And so, in a way, that
the slime and the messiness makes more sense to me now.
It just depends on sort of where you encounter the poem first.
And yet, the incredible thing about your words is that they don't, again, like all three of these poems,
it's a good point that you make about the empathy
shy away
in that earlier version. But I think mainly I was just thinking that the language there felt more abstract to me, and
we touched on last time,
in the moment,
which I want to come back to again because I was really interested in some of the things you were saying last time we talked.
That conflict,
how
and so I just wanted it to feel more immediate, and also move a little more quickly, because those words are kind of heavier,
the word,
and they sort of they slow down that moment, and so I just really wanted, the pain of that,
I suppose,
dialogue to come through more sharply, quickly.
Is gender,
and I guess
in a way,
if I'm,
inescapable?
I'm thinking about it now, because the poem ends up being this difficult meditation, this unresolved meditation on forgiveness, sort of just leaves it as this open question.
Could this word
I think,
here
that
could it be
for me it ends up being more effective to just have that.
Why does it need to be
pain,
a her? Why does it need to be her?
Sort of stand, and not have something.
I feel the same way
mitigated,
that I do in therapy when my therapist asks a question. I mean, that
other
reveals to me my consciousness that I wasn't there yet, and I'm like, oh yeah. I see that now.
More painful.
Yeah, I mean,
this is not a leading question. I'm asking this purely from
makes that question.
I don't know. I'm not trying to lead you, which I think sometimes therapists do, and I'm not doing that. I just want to state that I am asking this from a place of
do I have to forgive in order to love?
Ignorance, of wanting to
possible.
Curiosity. Because I don't know what the answer to that or your answer to that might be. Right? I'm not trying to lead you in towards it.
Challenging. I was just wondering
where I know. I think there's two things.
Personally stand
one thing was probably
with
there's probably an overlay
do I have to forgive
of gender in this book because
to even be possible?
There was for me in real life.
Well, I feel like the real question
instead of it being a binary, it's almost
that
like
this,
water
that this poem brings up is because it's looking at this situation where a mother's love seems less than unconditional.
Maybe it's because of my conditioning.
And so,
that I've lived
to me,
in a binary society.
So the question
but
beneath it
all
all
things
is
have like
sort of
a yin and yang essence.
What can you?
And that
unconditionally, can I unconditionally love someone
for that moment
who
I was getting
seems
the very yin sense
many moments
of what language
not
is.
to give that to me. And so what is the basis for unconditional love? But the second you ask that, it seems like there are conditions, right? First, this person has to act in such and such a way for me to love them. And so I think it's an ongoing question of what is that kind of pure or
I get the feeling
deep,
reading your
serious
body
love
because that's what Beautiful Odyssey Don't Yearn amounts to, right? B-O-D-Y. It literally is your body.
It's a really hard
at so many different levels
to answer.
Beautiful Odyssey Don't Yearn
but I think that's where the important stuff happens in poetry as well as in life. When you get to those,
is it given as a gift? Is it given maybe as a gift to us? Is it given as a gift to yourself?
Unanswerable, or you're still working through them.
Yeah, maybe both.
You're very much.
I also think it's
process.
Obligatory.
And so I wanted this poem to articulate that. That struggle of and turning to a stranger in this case in the poem,
because it's
interesting.
Ask,
what do you think?
There's a suggestion in the last line that you are letting
I don't
us
think it's something that you can
but then you are also opening yourself for us to leave you. There is something very reciprocal going on.
Those sort of essential questions are.
What is it you would hope?
Those kinds of questions, the ones you're posing in a lot of reader would, which I think also again makes them
be able to
so rich and beautiful and entertaining and healing as well. Which is why we will continue to be prescribing them in the pharmacy
so I think
for many years to come. And I just want to thank you so much for coming in and reading and chatting and sitting in front of the fire.
Sometimes when I read
with me, toasting a couple of marshmallows.
The way a word is
it's been really fun having
you.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's so new to me
poetry
that the word becomes new, and then my eyes are new.
It's a perfect combination.
It's great.
And so, if there was a way that you could use my body like a word and give me.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did.
The way you
if
would
so,
use it in
please
context,
could
that would
you
make
do
me
us
new.
a short but
you could leave that.
hopefully very sweet review on iTunes.
I really love that chat with Finn,
the podcast further.
I hope that
and don't forget we're on Twitter also as Poetry Pharmacy. And if you're wanting a prescription, we're more than happy to provide one. Just DM us or tweet.
And don't forget we're also on Twitter
big or small, and we'll find you a
Poetry Pharmacy.
You If you're wanting a prescription, we're more than happy to provide one. Just one final thing, in the next year I'm involved in a fundraising project called 52 Poems in 52 Weeks, where I'm trying, as the name suggests,
as well as making
to learn 52 great poems like the ones you heard today in 52 weeks. I'm currently on my...
for me to give away to somebody listening to this podcast.
It's all to raise some money for the Safe House Education College Fund in Kenya, a charity set up about 15 years ago to help young Maasai girls escape from FGM and child marriage, as well as providing them with primary and secondary education.
Thank you for listening.
And if you want to see me doing my cover version recitals of the poems, you can watch that on the YouTube channel, 52 Poems in 52 Weeks. Great if you subscribe, but even more so than subscribing, please, a small donation, a large donation, even just a couple of bucks to the sponsorship page, link on this website, would be so very much appreciated. What else? Yes, some fantastic poetry collection prizes on offer for those subscribing £5 or even $5 or more. Check it out by following the link on the episode page. Thanks for listening, and take care until we next meet in the Poetry Pharmacy. Bye.